Welcome back to our Rocketpool Node Validator series. This is video 2 of a 4-part series, each broken up into bite-sized pieces for you to better understand and keep your attention. In today's video, we will focus on securing your node against malicious actors and guide you through the installation process using Docker. So let's dive right in. The setup today is the server as the NUC 11 and the MacBook as the client with remote access via SSH. The Ubuntu software will be used. Before starting, you should have already installed your node with Ubuntu and have SSH setup. You can refer back to video 1 for installation and SSH connection. Let's start with security. This is an introduction to securing your Rocketpool node. Our goal in this section is to secure your node against potential threats. Whether you're running a node locally or on the cloud, these tips will help harden your node against outside attacks. Keep in mind, this is a starting point for your security, and we will not cover more advanced options in this video. You can access more resources in the link. As always, you should follow along to the Rocketpool documents on securing your node and read ahead. Let's review the steps. You will see that some of these are optional and the rest are recommended. Number 1, secure your node by creating an SSH key pair. Number 2, disable the login via password. Number 3, enable authentication. Number 4, enable automatic security updates. Number 5, enable a firewall. And number 6, enable brute force and DDoS protection. Here are your quick tips. Tip number 1, if you are new to Linux and command line, take your time to slowly learn. Make sure that your commands are entered in correctly. Command line requires precision. Before pressing enter, double check the command for accuracy. Also, take advantage of online tutorials, guides, and forums. Websites like Stack Overflow, Linux Documentation Project, and various Linux distribution documents are valuable resources. Tip number 2, avoid compromising your client device. This means use a trusted device only. Consider using your client machine as a dedicated to only running a terminal. You want to avoid downloading pirated pieces of software from the internet that could corrupt your machine. Make sure that your software is updated. Consider using a passphrase instead of a password. For example, don't run, walk, it's not a race. The passphrase helps you to remember it and also makes it much more difficult to guess, giving it more security. Two-factor authentication is another layer where someone gets access to your device, they will have to use another form to log in. Use trusted networks. You could assume that your network could be compromised with malware at any time, especially if your home network is using other devices from other users. Use your own network. Do not use a public network that you do not trust, like a local coffee shop where internet is not secure. Step 1 will be to secure your SSH by creating an SSH key pair. Now, this key pair will replace your password that is susceptible to brute force attacks. Brute force is a straightforward attack. It's a method where an attacker attempts all possible combinations of passwords until the correct one is found. For example, if someone was able to guess your password, they now have access to your SSH and server. SSH gives stronger security to prevent hacking into your password. An SSH key pair consists of 2 cryptographic keys, a public and a private key. The private key is kept on the client and the public key is stored on the server. As a result, even if the public key is exposed, an attacker would still need the corresponding private key to gain access. You should also protect your private key with a password. Never share your private key or password with anyone. To create your SSH key pair, first access the terminal on the client machine. But make sure first you are not logged into your node machine. Please exit out first. Remember that the private key is only accessed on the client machine. We are now going to create an SSH key pair. We will use the public key signature system called ED25519, which is an algorithm that was introduced to provide a high level of security with faster performance compared to some other public key systems. You can then run the command SSH keygem below. There's a copy and paste shell that you can use on the Rocketpool docs to plug in your terminal. You then will see that it is generating your public and private key and enter file into which you want to save the key. Now it'll automatically enter the default listed, shown there. The username is your SSH username that will show up. Now you can move this to any file if you want to pick another path. But if you're good with this, then you can hit enter, and this is your path to your private key. After enter, you will see a Enter passphrase. This is your password for your private key, and it will be used when you connect to your node. Do not leave this blank, or anyone will be able to access your key if they get a hold of your device. Make sure that you write this down and do not forget your password. You will not be able to recover this. You then hit enter and retype it for confirmation. After your password is confirmed, you will see the saved ID and a key, fingerprint, and random image. This shows the location of the private key, which is loaded automatically, and then the second line shows the location of the public key. Notice that .pub will be your public key. Now, in the previous steps, we created both a private and a public key, but now we have to create a path. macOS does not automatically load the private key, so you will need to load this onto your client machine with the following command. Now that you have your key pair, it is time to add your public key to your node, allowing you to connect over SSH using your private key instead of your username and password. There are two ways to do this. One, use SSH copy ID, or you can add it manually. You can access the Rocketpool documents under Add the Public Key, and you will see two options using SSH copy ID or manually. Either you can copy the clipboard shell and paste it in the terminal, or for the copy ID selection, you will run the commands, being careful to add your username and IP address at the end. You will then be prompted with a message that is shown at the bottom, showing the source of keys to be installed and attempting to log in with the new keys. This is making sure that your keys are not already there. It will fail login, and then it is verified to add the public key to the node machine. It will then ask you for a password, which is your Ubuntu node password. Last, it will show you that the keys were added, and you should be able to log into the machine with the SSH. But now you don't have to type a password. Instead, the password of your SSH private keys. The next step is to disable password-based login to enhance security, further making sure that no one can use your password and that your password key is used. I recommend before moving forward that you have two separate terminals just in case you have a backup session. You can add a new terminal window and keep the old one minimized. In our first step, we will open the configuration file for the SSH server with the following listed command under the SSH_config. The screen will look like the picture here, where you will have to navigate up and down to find the preferred settings. Next, you will want to change the settings in the config file as listed below in the Rocketpool documents in order to disable the login via password. Once completed, make sure you save your settings with the Control-0 and exit with Control-X. Then you can restart SSH to access the saved settings. For an extra layer of security, enable two-factor authentication. We recommend using Google Authenticator or another device like your phone. Follow the steps to set it up. It is recommended that you enable automatic security updates to keep your system secure. This ensures you receive the latest patches and fixes. Set up unattended upgrades for automatic updates. Here's the command for installation. Protect your node by enabling a firewall. We will use UFW or uncomplicated firewall to allow specific connections and deny the rest. Configure it according to your Rocketpool setup. Here are the commands to allow SSH in your ETH1 and ETH2 clients with the standardized ports. Consider installing Fail2Ban for protection against brute force attacks and DDoS attempts. Configure it to enhance your node security. This is a program that will monitor incoming connections and block IP addresses that are not needed. Follow the directions on the site. Congratulations! You've implemented crucial security measures for your Rocketpool node. Now let's move on to the installation process using Docker. Before getting started, I want to briefly go over client diversity. You will need to choose a consensus client and an execution client for your Rocketpool node setup. As you remember, the execution client listens and executes transactions, while the consensus client provides consensus from validated data from the execution client. These two clients work together to sync the Ethereum state. As you can see, there are multiple options. For consensus, you have Prism, Lighthouse, Teku, Nimbus, Lodestar. And for the execution client, you have Geth, Nethermind, Besu, Aragon. Now, the Rocketpool Smart Node installer provides a random client that can choose for you if you like. But do your research. Pick your clients ahead of time. But bottom line, picking the most dominant use client is not always a good idea. Using different types of consensus clients in a network helps lower the risk of problems caused by bugs or attacks. On the flip side, if one client is used way more than the other, any problem becomes much more serious. The bigger the dominance of that one client, the greater the risk. Imagine a situation where maybe a mistake in the client leads to wrong actions or allows attackers to manipulate it. Having diverse client setup helps lessen the impact of these issues. You can read more about this to decide in clientdiversity.org. Next, we will select a Rocketpool node as the default Docker-based configuration. This mode is the fastest and easiest to use as a beginner, and it will install everything needed to run your node. Now, Docker is a platform that helps automate the deployment of the applications and places them in containers. Containers hold everything in a file and keep the area clean and compatible. These steps will be to include the download of the Rocketpool command line interface, use the command line interface to install the Smartstack, and in our next video, we will configure the Smartstack with the UI wizard. Now, since we are using Ubuntu, make sure that Docker is not already installed because it will mess up the version that we install. Just run snaplist, and if it is installed, you will need to delete it. This is the Rocketpool command line interface with the following containers that we will access. For macOS, you can deploy the following commands based on your system's CPU architecture. Just follow along with the Rocketpool documents, and once you have installed the CLI, you can test it by running it with the version command listed. The output should read the latest version. You now have installed CLI and you are ready to deploy the Smart Node Stack. Deploy the Smart Node Stack using the command Rocketpool service install. This installs Docker, Docker Compose, and loads the Smart Node files. If needed, manually install Docker and Docker Compose by using Rocketpool docs. Your installation should look similar to the screen if it was deployed correctly. You should then log out and log back into SSH for completion. Last, you want to consider configuring your Docker storage location by creating a new file. It will automatically store this initially on your operating system drive. So if you want it somewhere else, you can follow the directions on the site to do this. We have now completed these steps in this video. Number 1, securing your node, and 2, installing the Rocketpool with Docker. You are now ready to proceed to the next video, video 3, where we configure the smart node and provision the node. Congratulations, that wraps up today's tutorial on securing your Rocketpool node and installing it using Docker. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more Rocketpool tutorials. Here's your certificate of completion, part 2, an introduction to Ethereum Rocketpool node setup.